Wow. Good morning, everyone. This is DJ Lala in the studio live. You're listening to Ozcat Radio, 89.5 FM, KZCT in beautiful Vallejo. Yes, I know. And today, normally third Thursday is Art Beat with the storytellers, and we have a storyteller for you this morning. Big time. Big time. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone that's hanging in there and listening to all of our shows. Thank you, Kevin, so much for putting us on the air every week without fail, whether we can get to the studio and be safe, and we're safe here now. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our show this morning. Today, we have author Rick Bibbero, author of 90 Degrees to Zamboanga. And this is an exciting story, an adventure story about marijuana smuggling over a 2-decade period of time. And our host, co-host, and interviewer is none other than Kate Martinelli. So I want to thank her for being here. And without further ado, hi, Rick. How are you today?
Well, thank you very much, Laura. I'm so happy to be here. This is a very unique experience for me. So hopefully we'll make a good show of it. So I first wanted to read the dedication of this book because it kind of sets the tone of what was going on. This book is dedicated to the memory of Father John Source, whose guidance and spirituality, friendship, and counsel helped me enjoy what could have been an otherwise rough time in my life. Father had many sayings he used to bestow on me, some inspirational, some spiritual, some were funny, and some were simply appropriate at the time. My favorite was, listen and learn from the wisdom of the other guy. You don't have to go to the electric chair to know that's a place you don't want to go, which was very appropriate to me. And this book is a cautionary tale. So I don't want you to try to go out and do this at home. But it's a tale of, I'd like to read this actually. I wrote something a couple of years ago, and it really kind of sets the tone about what the story's all about. 90 Degrees to Zamboanga depicts an integral part of marijuana's storied history, offering a very unique and fascinating novel-like perspective of the subject that the average reader cannot have. It chronicles the saga of a pioneering marijuana trafficking operation as seen through my eyes, being one of its founding principal players. This memoir details my 20-plus year experience as a smuggler, marijuana entrepreneur, and ultimately convicted felon. It is the tale of my life and times, the fun and excitement, the insanity, the relationship, the consequences, the aftermath, and the redemption stemming from the rise and fall of a criminal international marijuana enterprise. It was now the beginning of November 1974, and after having just survived the rages of Typhoon Gloria, a Category 4 storm that plowed through the Philippines, we were still at least 10 days from our destination of Pattaya, Thailand, where we were planning to load our 41-foot sailboat with over a ton of the best marijuana on the face of the planet, sail it thousands of miles back to California, where our voyage started back in July, and sell it for over $3 million. This would be the largest single load of Thai sticks ever seen in the United States to date, and if we made it home, we'd change the world and become legends. Those things both happened.
Yeah.
Only a few small potential obstacles stood in our way. Among those was the possibility of getting caught by a patrol boat from one of the nearby countries we were at war with, held as prisoners of war, or simply executed as spies. We also could be nabbed in the waters of a country whose penalty for any kind of drug offense was death, either by firing squad or hanging. Or we might simply be lost at sea and never to be heard from again. We also faced the possibility of finally getting home after spending all that time, money, and effort required to actually complete the ocean voyage, only to find that the weed had gone stale from the amount of time elapsed between harvest and consumer. Or the load might have been ruined due to overexposure mildew, infusion with salt water, or simply waterlogged, thus rendering the entire venture worthless. However, at this point, our immediate problem was the possibility of being overtaken by pirates and summarily executed. Contemplating our predicament and wondering what lay in store for our future, I reflected on how two Jewish college students, both from upper middle class families who grew up in one of the finest San Francisco neighborhoods with promising futures of medicine and law, could now find ourselves on a marijuana odyssey at sea, fighting for our very survival in one of the most dangerous places on earth. My story is about how it all happened from the beginning in 1969, stumbling through the dry arroyos of the Sonoran Desert in the dead of night, carrying a few pounds of Mexican pot on our backs, to spending months at sea, enduring some of the worst conditions imaginable, sailing boatloads of weed across the Pacific Ocean from Thailand. The epic adventure continues into the 1990s, where fortunes were made and lost, and many lives were glorified and then ruined. It's not only a story of all the crazy and outrageous adventures, but also the relationships with family, friends, business partners who wanted it all, parents who didn't understand, and the women who gravitated to the bad boys. Extravagance, greed, power, ruthlessness, deceit, along with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, all come into play. There aren't many of us pioneers and risk-takers left who are capable or willing to tell these stories firsthand, which are as much a part of history as the exciting and intriguing tales of the bootleggers, pirates, swashbucklers of yesteryear.
Yeah.
The market for this 250,000-word odyssey spanning over 2 decades is to an audience of adventure story readers, and is intended to open up this exciting and secretive account of past events and high adventures to people who have an interest in marijuana and its unique history and how we got to where we are in today's world.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, that sounds like our audience right there. We definitely have adventurers, and many of whom love the smoking of fine marijuana. Am I good?
I'd like to hear you a little bit louder.
Okay. How's that? I don't know what, sometimes you don't have the right angle on the mic.
Or why don't you trade seats?
Am I okay?
You're perfect. I'd like Kate to trade seats with me right now. Yeah, let's keep it on.
All right.
Yeah.
Do a little switcheroo. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, I read the book over the last few days, and I will tell you, the 90 Degrees to Zamboanga, it's chock full. It's about 400 pages? It's
about 542 pages.
And these are big pages. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. We've had some self-published authors come through here before, but I have to say your book is really one of the most beautiful self-published products that I've seen. But it is a story. Every single chapter is chock full of details. What let's talk about like opening up, because this is your life and you're telling it from the first person. What has the feedback been from family and friends, or if anybody's like that of being so frankly honest about this stuff?
Well,
Get on your mic.
I always felt that if I was going to write this story, it was going to have to be an honest story told from my heart. It was going to have to be very personal. And so I wrote it, and I tried for a long time to get an agent. I never could get an agent, never could get a publisher, and I figured if I ever wanted to see this thing in print, I better do it myself.
So the first thing was getting the book, and then the letter that you just wrote, that was after you had created the book.
That was to an agent. That was a query letter to an agent.
Okay.
So I tried to,
So that never panned out.
Well, I never got an agent. I got of the 50 or 75 or 100 letters I sent out, I got one response who said he loved it, but it wasn't the type of thing he did. Gosh. And that's kind of that's what happens to authors. You just don't. especially an unknown author with no accolades.
Right.
That was me.
But the story needed to be told, and I think nowadays this idea that people are publishing their own stories. We have so many here in Vallejo. Brendan Riley's book, Lower Georgia Street, comes to mind about the crazy goings on about Georgia Street. And similarly to your book, some of the stories are tawdry, some of it's dark, but at the same time, that's part of what makes a good story. You know, there's got to be some...
Well, they say bad decisions make for great stories, and I think that's probably what's happened here, because, I mean, here we were, a bunch of young guys who had futures, and we just decided to, for some reason, maybe some cosmic reason, I don't know, we all took this turn and went this direction rather than the normal direction.
One of them is very clear. You talk about your father, and that is a very... one of the ongoing themes of the book, because it's not just a book about smuggling, it's about you. It's about your life and the people that you loved and the people that you were in conflict with and the people that you trusted. Your dad was really rebelling. It seems like rebelling against your dad's plan for your life played a significant role in setting you on these journeys, which, I mean, every chapter is basically a different part of the journey. We go to Mexico, we go to Thailand, we go to the Philippines. You are literally traveling. We go by boat, we go by plane, we go by car, we go by courier.
Well, there are also parts to it that, you know, we go to jail.
Yes.
And we go to prison, and we have an aftermath.
I'm going to spoil the ending for you, as most of these tales do. There, somebody ends up something goes bad, but thankfully, you know, Rick being in the studio here with us right now, which I kept saying as I was reading some of these harrowing stories, like, are they going to make it back on this rickety boat, getting back to the... Wait, okay, I know he makes it. He's coming in for an interview.
So, you know, I think that part of the story is intriguing, and it had to be written in a very personal way.
Very personal.
So that the emotions, that was the thing I wanted to do, is bring out the emotion. I mean, I had read a lot of stories of how this subject was dealt with, and I read indictments, numerous indictments, my own included.
That was some of your big research from the book, was actually researching the court records.
Researching
from
the
your
court
own
records,
case.
Reading books about how it was done, how other people have approached the subject, and I wanted mine to be different.
It is very different because some of these accounts tend to sort of, I think the parts of it the high moments, tend to me to be about the camaraderie or about the successful problem solving or about what was going on with your life. The harrowing times, I mean, it gets dark. I was comparing it to, which you hadn't seen the series, but the Better Call Saul series is about a man who goes from being a con artist to becoming a shyster lawyer. But in his adventures as well, I'm glad yours turned out a little bit better. But there are dark parts. There are mobster people. There are weapons. There are things going real. There is jail in foreign countries. Jail in Mexico that is
no joke.
You can get on your mic too, Miss Laura, if you're gonna. There you go.
No joke.
See, it gets serious, but at the same time, it's also. We were talking about the cover of the book, which let's give a shout out to Miss Lauren
Taylor,
who's listening. The cover of the book is so beautiful. You can hold it up for the camera. It is gorgeous. It is. I thought it was a much smaller book, to be honest. It is big, beautiful, colorful, and but I think the idea that it's an adventure. There's highs and lows in this tale, so it's not so dark that it's not depressing. I didn't think it was a depressing tale.
I've tried to lead my life in a positive way, and I think this book comes out. I think that comes out in the book. I wanted it to be an adventure story where even the darkest parts that people would be most worried about, I wanted that part of it to be an adventure as well. So I think, you know, whether it was prison, whether it was the aftermath, whether things that weren't going good, I wanted those to be part of the adventure. So it's like it keeps rolling.
The boat stuff was the stuff that was getting me. Like, just like you're already doing this illegal activity and then you're on a boat loading up as Rick says, loading up a ton of marijuana onto a boat. And when he says ton, he literally means a ton. The amounts, I wrote down here math. You actually, this book, for someone who likes math, there's a lot of good math to do with this book. You guys made a lot of money.
We did. And, the money we made at that time, if you consider inflation to what it is, to what that value of the money is now, it's 10 times what it was then. So...
And yet some of the prices, like for the good, are still kind of like still cannabis is still a valuable, even legalized, it's still a valuable commodity. And
it's very interesting on that score because we were dealing in pounds at that time or kilos. Or even bigger amounts. When you get
how
up
much
into
is a
tons,
kilo? I never did look. Is that like 2 pounds?
2.2 pounds. Now, in this world, we're dealing in ounces and eighths and quarters and grams. And
I even saw you had lid in there. Was a lid an ounce? How much was a lid?
Lid was an ounce.
A lid was an
roughly.
Ounce. And I mean, even a lot of people listening that are old school cannabis folks. I'm thinking Chuck Ludwig comes to mind because he would love these tales and know a lot of them. But they actually talk about the Thai going to Thailand, the origin of the Thai sticks, because that was a huge thing. Weed from Thailand.
Yeah.
Now I could read a passage of that.
It's a beautiful story.
Because I went
the family.
Well, when I was over there in Thailand and went up to the growers and educated them on how we wanted to make the sticks, and I can read that passage.
Let's do it. Get up on that mic, though, Rick.
Okay.
With that beautiful reading voice of yours.
So we traveled from southern Thailand up to the growing area.
This is just in the middle of the book, too, by the way. This book has, each chapter is chalk. Go ahead.
So the next morning we traveled an hour down a bumpy dirt road to a remote jungle village called Bonkusuman. Fine red dust and road and mud covered the BMW. 30 or 40 thatched huts stood on stilts in a clearing which had been cut from the dense green jungle. Pat parked the car in front of the village's longhouse, a sort of town meeting hall. The other huts were individual family dwellings. The village was very primitive and there was no electricity or running water. Pat and I climbed up a set of wooden stairs and entered the main building. Pat introduced me to the village chief. He was an old man with 2 sons, both in their late 20s, ran the marijuana growing operation. The chief, his sons, and a number of important village elders already gathered in the longhouse, placed their palms together in a Thai gesture known as a Y, and bowed deeply as a sign of great respect. I gave a short speech, which Pat translated into the Northeast Thai dialect, and again the village elders wide. I now suddenly understood why I was so highly respected. I was their ultimate benefactor, directly responsible for their livelihood. I'd like to see the fields, I said to Pat. Pat spoke to the chief's sons. Okay, we go with these 2, Pat continued, gesturing toward the 2 youths standing in front of the longhouse with M16 automatic rifles carelessly slung over their shoulders. The group, including the chief's 2 sons, the guards, Pat and I walked about a mile on a dirt path through the jungle. We came to a clearing where in front of us appeared to be a 5-acre Christmas tree farm. Only the Christmas trees were 8 to 10 foot tall marijuana plants at the height of maturation. The flower tops sparkling with potent resin glistened in the sunlight. I had never seen such a beautiful sight.
Yeah.
I think I'll stop there.
I can smell it.
I think I'll stop there. That's pretty good. Into the village.
Well, one of the other parts I think that you talk of in the book, it almost is a tale of the refinement of cannabis itself, because we're sort of used to in our time. But we were saying this morning. I mean, I'll out myself. I went to the cannabis store yesterday and have a bag with packaged product, which tells me if it's sativa, it's indica, the strain, the THC content. I mean, back then, some of in one episode you talk about having where you had received the bait and switch. They had shown you some really good weed, and you guys ended up getting the as they call it here in Vallejo, they call it the Bammer weed.
Yeah, we called it Border Brown.
Border Brown, yeah. I've always wondered too. Is it Border Brown? Is it like that because of the storage mechanism that it's the way it's kept that it's turning brown, or is it
older.
the strain?
I think it's just old. It's just old and dried, and it's just kind of.
You guys remember that weed? You kids listening, you never seen weed like this, but the old timers again. I'm going to call you out again, Chuck.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, on that subject, we returned to the village where we were introduced to a typical Thai family. Pat and I climbed the steps into the thatched hut. There was one main room where the entire family ate and slept. Sitting upon bamboo mats were the grandmother, the mother, and 2 young girls. In front of the women were large 33-gallon plastic bag filled with freshly dried marijuana flower tops. This is about putting them on the sticks. And so how we were educating. The women and girls were meticulously manicuring each individual top with cuticle scissors, then breaking off the flower tops from the main stem and fastening each one to a thin bamboo stick and securing them with a fine piece of twine. The combination of the sticky resin and twine held the tops securely to the stick. Each 20 sticks were then secured together in 2 rows of 10 stacked one on top of the other, and then secured together with another piece of twine and held the bundle. Each woman had a stack of bundles at her feet. I picked up a particularly nice-looking bundle from Grandma's pile, and using one of the few Thai phrases I knew, I spoke directly to her. Soy mak mak, meaning very beautiful. The old woman put her palms together in a Y and bowed. Her tan and wrinkled face broke into a wide, toothless, ear-to-ear grin. I turned to Pat. The quality must all look like this. Only the freshest lime green to gold color is what we want. All the sticks should be fat like this, so the buds are not too compressed. As an example, I picked up a particularly gorgeous one, a half-inch in diameter stick, showing it to the group of women workers. I produced a small hand-held gram scale from my briefcase and weighed the stick. It weighed 18 grams. Then I weighed a particularly fat bundle containing 20 sticks. It weighed 285 grams. Nobody in the United States has ever seen anything like this, and it will blow their minds. This is exactly what we want, and only this, Pat. Make it clear to the chief. We will accept nothing less, and please impress upon him. If they send anything other than this down to the ranch, we'll throw it away and not pay him for it. We will not accept it, period. I can't stress the importance of this concept enough. If we accept anything less, then that's what we'll get. Not to be trite, but water seeks its own level, the lowest level. If we set the bar as high as it will go, we can dominate the market, and anyone else who brings it in will have lesser quality and won't be able to compete.
Wow.
And I was a recipient of exactly.
I was just going to say, I bet some of the listeners out there have had some of because it came through here. Yes. It was a lot of the products that you guys were bringing in were coming through right through here through the Bay Area. And
we unloaded over in Richmond.
And go into friends and family. And going through friends and family, go through distribution, because back then everybody, you got to understand, people wanted to smoke weed just like we do today, and you couldn't get it. And people were the same as today. They wanted the finest quality. I mean, that's one thing. It's funny, people always talk about the commercialization of weed, that Philip Morris is going to take over and make all this bootsy weed. Well, no, because some smart kids are always going to know how to grow better weed.
Well, that's the thing. If you start growing commercially,
nobody wants that.
The quality will drop. But some people do want it because they can afford it.
Yes, this is true. Yeah. This is true.
So that, I think, is the other side of it. Because when we had damaged weed, when some of it got
still found
wet,
a market for it.
We still found a market for it. We were able to dry it out, and we sold it to people who didn't have as much money.
Well, I guess that's true because people, the one thing about cannabis, I guess that it is used by people on every economic scale, from poor folks, rolling up whatever they're rolling up, and to connoisseurs at the top. Although, that's a total stereotype, because some poor folks probably smoke really good weed.
Absolutely.
They're poor, but they got the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are weed connoisseurs amongst all the socioeconomic levels and racial and gender stereotypes, I'm sure.
There's something for everybody.
Amen.
It seems like.
One of the things it's funny, we're talking about writing, is that you write other people's stories into this book. It's your story, but you have to tell the stories of your friends, your colleagues, even scenes of your own parents, which moved me. There were a few scenes where you had, obviously, to get that scene, you had to talk to your parents. One scene in particular, we talk about your cousin Marty in Mexico, and your parents came down to Mexico on vacation and found out that he had been put in jail and had to go literally visit their nephew in a Mexican prison. But
on their anniversary.
It's being told from your parents' point of view. And I found that intriguing, and probably was it painful to go back over some of these maybe not some, I mean, I don't know. When I was a kid, it's like those moments in your life when you have to go up to your dad and it's like, oh my God, Dad,
You mean like when I stole the car and got caught?
Yeah, that was just the starting. That was the very first episode, wasn't it? I'm sorry, Dad.
I don't think Dad knew what
no, he didn't know.
You had in the car.
But how have you? Well, your parents have passed on, but has anybody given you any feedback about their version of themselves in the book, or how?
Well, some people have been pleased with how I represented them in the book. Some people have not been pleased. And that was hard, too, because I wanted to make this story real, and I didn't want to sugarcoat it. I wanted to tell the true story.
And some of that has to do with addiction and double-crossing.
If I wanted to write a fantasy and make everybody just these wonderful people, I could have done that. But that wouldn't have been the story.
And it wouldn't have been the truth.
So, I mean, the truth, I mean, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, that's
and about yourself, too, because
I tried to be very introspective about that.
I can tell that in the early chapters, you're sort of channeling your younger self. You sort of have a bit more brash, nose thumbing at your dad, at maybe what was expected of you. That part reminded me a little bit of The Graduate. When
we were kind of
you need to get into plastics, young man. And you're just like, get out of here, old folks. We're going to go have some.
We were pretty footloose and fancy free at the very beginning, but when we turned it into a real business, it got much more serious.
Yes,
I mean, we were just kids out having a good time, basically in the Mexico.
And I think that in that regard, there's a little bit, and I'm naming these movies or films or other pieces to just give you guys a frame of mind of what kind of story this is. It reminded me of Goodfellas in a way too. It starts out you really get to see how Rick kind of gets in, and at one point you're the outsider looking in and saying, well, we could do this a better way, and offering suggestions. And then at one point in the story, you're the guy. Yeah. You're the guy organizing the whole deal. You're the guy requisitioning the boat. You're the guy talking to the chief.
Well, I guess that was, a part of growing up in that situation. I mean, now the responsibility came on to me. At first, I was just a crew member, and then it just sort of escalated, and things started to happen, and all of a sudden, I was the guy.
And you get that, like you actually get that in the narration of the book. I am really impressed with how you've worked that into. So by the time you get to the closing chapters where the character has been through all these things and has been through the legal system and is coming out questioning what did he learn, that is also very satisfying.
Right, would I do it again?
You get the bad boy bit, but then you also get the reality of what I lost and what was gained. And one of the things I loved is that one of the ending themes was your dog. The dog that you loved, that you had a piece of artwork created to memorialize this dog. And that to me, that lingering image told me what your final take of life is. Your dog is your best friend.
Well,
and people that you love are the most important thing. Is
my original concept for the story was a boy and his dog. That was kind of because Pappy was with me all the time. I mean,
the blue shirt.
And the blue shirt. And the
You
lucky
never
shirt.
ever Rick talks about in the novel in this story that he had a special lucky shirt that he always wore for the
every
smuggling.
smuggle. I mean, it started out. It was just a dark shirt.
There's no way to say it nice other than smuggling. Is
No,
there?
I don't
Literally
think so. If
when
you
you're
wanna-
doing
if you wanna
kilos.
say- yeah, if
Because
you
when
wanna
you're
say
doing
what
the
it
amount
is.
of weight that you were doing, and which is, and you paid your time for it. So, but literally, you guys, we are talking. Again, I'm going to say the math, the dollar amounts that you read about, the amounts of weight of these drugs and product is quite amazing.
I mean, I would say over the years, it's somewhere around 30 tons.
Wow. And millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. So I broke down to various people in the.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I had it all.
Right.
I mean, everybody.
And you go off in various moments. You go off and sort of live on your money and kind of go out for a bit, and then in this story, somebody always comes with a great idea.
Oh yeah,
and
Let's
you
go back
bite.
I think we could just do one more.
Right.
Was it as much the adventure as the money?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I always felt it was that was the motivation. The adventure was the motivation. I always used to tell people who were with me, don't focus on the money. Whatever you do, focus on what you're doing. The money will be there if you do your job.
And you guys had taken some like you understood. I think if you're in a business like this, loss is part of it. So at there's a few, which is what I really liked, because say the scene where you guys got double crossed, where you got the Bootsy Bammer weed. So instead, like in a normal story, that's it. The weed was terrible, but you guys actually cleaned up that weed, got it together, and still made something happen about it.
We were innovative as well as we could be. I mean, you have to work with what you have, and we had this load of terrible looking weed that had all this sticky mess all over it, and we were still going to make something on this. We weren't going to throw it away.
What do you think about like today? It's literally like we're talking about a different world, and that was just literally like 15 years ago. That world still was. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, Pete Wilson, smoke a joint, go to jail. One seed or stem in your car would mean that they would impound your car.
Wow. We're talking total prohibition.
Right.
Total
prohibition.
Young people today, you've grown up with cannabis stores and legal cannabis, and thank God, because I'm sure, I don't know, what did your officer say? Although at the level you guys were doing it, it would still be illegal today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's even with total legalization, are they going to give people like me back my rights? Or. When you were into it at that level, that's
right.
We're not talking,
which is still again illegal, because in today's world, it is all now controlled. It is government controlled, and you have to go through various weights and measures and countings and agencies,
testing and everything.
Yes, it's
and testing.
Mm-hmm.
It's serious business.
Yep. I wanted to read a little bit about Marty, because I think that was kind of a.
Marty is I think he's the most tragic figure in the book.
Very, very sad part of. I mean, I suppose the most sad part of my story was.
Marty ends up. Just run through.
I'll read this.
Okay, go.
One of the saddest parts of my story was telling about what happened to my cousin Marty. In 1972, Martin Bibbero became an early casualty of the war on drugs when he was arrested at the Mexico City airport with 5 kilos of cocaine concealed in a false bottom suitcase. By 1972, I had already been at it, smuggling, for 3 years, having brought in several tons from Mexico by sailboat, and was middlemaning loads of pot and hash as well in the San Francisco Bay Area. In the beginning, Marty was my main distributor. He was making good money, but became jealous of me and my lifestyle, compared to his. However, as he became more entrenched in the San Francisco scene, and as his use of coke increased, his effectiveness as a pot dealer decreased dramatically. That made me very paranoid about being around him, his friends, and his daily coke parties. It was truly a recipe for disaster in the making, and one in which I wanted no part of. It was around then that he came up with a jealously motivated cockamamie plan to strike it rich by elevating himself from being a small-time coke dealer to a big-time international smuggler. He had a plan, all right. It included partnering with a sleazy local attorney with supposed connections in South America, a brazen and insane scheme to slip past airport customs in Mexico from Bogota with cocaine concealed in a false-bottom suitcase, then transfer the coke to the concealed trunk stash of a VW Carmanguia and drive it across the U.S. border. He was out of his mind, and I tried to warn him.
Things did not go well for Marty. There's some, and I will say that some of the scenes again of your father visiting Marty in jail, and then at the end, Marty comes back where he tells you his story when he gets out, and it is a terrible, terrible tale which includes being raped in jail. It is very hard to read, and I'd say that is about the darkest portion of the book, and that part actually reminded me of like the Midnight Express, where the kids did just not paying attention. This is international, and the fact that cocaine was such a bigger deal, and that is also one thing in the book. There is. While some of the people are doing cocaine, snorting through the story, but
it
really
was always around,
But it's not the cannabis is really the main drug that you're dealing with. I had
many opportunities,
and you tried in many of the scenes. You try to say no to that other stuff and try to push off from it.
Right. Unfortunately, others didn't.
Yeah,
Like Marty,
like Willie, I mean, there's a bunch of people.
We talked about a few of them on the drug
yes.
over here.
Or even what was the one that was the alcoholic?
Killian.
Dave Killian.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're doing the same things when you're an adult, when you're in your 60s that you were doing when you're 30, you're done. I mean, chances are it's gonna catch you.
Usually, it doesn't have a happy ending.
Yeah, it's gonna catch up with you. I mean, if you don't grow out of that, you're finished. I mean, I saw it happen to numerous people, including my best friend Willie.
And Willie had a nickname as Peter Pan.
Yeah, the boy who never grew up.
Who Peter Pan was.
Is it hard to write? I mean, I think hard enough to write about yourself, but is it hard to write honestly about the people that you knew?
Well, I think you have to figure out who they were, what they were like, and try to be honest about it. Like I said, it's the good, bad, and the ugly. It might not be pretty. The truth sometimes isn't pretty, but it's the truth. What can
I think
you do?
You managed that. I think you managed to show some of these guys their good qualities and then some of their foolhardiness.
Yeah, or some of their
and as well as your own,
and some underhanded qualities too. I was no saint.
And you don't come across as one. I mean, really, the honesty of that is makes it such a pleasure to read the book, because very seldom do you have it would almost usually be written in a third person.
Well, I didn't want to do that. I mean, I'd read enough third person accounts, and that wasn't where I was going with it. If I was going to do this story, it was going to be me talking.
How has the reception of this been from people, from readers and family and people, your friends and family? I imagine have been amongst the first readers of it.
Well, yeah, I'm getting a lot of very good. I mean, I've got 30, 40, 50 reviews and ratings, all 3, 4, 5-star ratings, a couple of lower ratings, but by and large they've been 4 and 5 stars. So I took 2 years. I wanted to see the reception I would get, coming from nowhere. I wanted it to be word of mouth. I wanted to see if we could actually produce a book and sell some books just from word of mouth. So in 2 years I sold a couple of 100 books, which I thought, for coming from nowhere, wasn't bad. And then we decided, everybody told me, you have to go to social media. You've got to do this if that's the way of the world.
And you have Miss Lauren involved. You have some great people. Do you want to give? First of all, let's say who we're talking to in case people are just tuning in. We are talking to Rick Bibbero, the author of 90 Degrees to Zamboanga. Did I say it right?
Zamboanga.
Zamboanga. Where is Zamboanga?
It's in the Philippines. It's in the southern Philippines on the island of Mindanao. Maybe I should go into that a little bit.
We were visiting that because
of why I named the book that name.
That's another.
It's a catchy name.
Yeah. Well, Kate and I know the story. It's hair raising.
Oh my God, there are many hair raising adventures in this book.
Yeah. Well, it just shows the true character of these sailors, adventurers, to endure the most scary, deadly situations.
Oh my gosh.
Against
pirates.
Pirates, but this is Mother Nature right here. It's crazy.
I'm just trying to find this part about.
Oh, it's marked in the book.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
If all else fails.
If all else fails, you can go to the book.
I have to say again, and they can find the book on Amazon.com. You can get the Kindle version or the hardback. But I would really recommend that you get the hardback version. It is a beautiful book. It would make such a nice book. You said, Rick, that it's too heavy to take on a vacation. But to me, I would take that one book on vacation because each chapter is like almost a mini novella in itself.
I bet it reads great on a Hawaiian beach.
Yes, on a Hawaiian beach. Oh,
it does.
That would be nice.
Smoking a joint if you can do
Smoke
that.
and just the cover. I guarantee if somebody saw you reading that, the cover would catch someone else's eye, and they would ask you what you were reading.
Yes,
it's happened.
If you want to act cool, so even if you're not going to read the book, just get it to be cool.
Yeah. Okay, let me read you this, why I got the name, because people ask me, and it's kind of an obscure name. To digress for a moment, 90 Degrees to Zamboanga, the title of this story, became a metaphor for the entire voyage and for the story as a whole. Here we were, at the mercy of nature's wild fury. We had been caught in a typhoon and lost in the Sulu Sea for what seemed at the time like days on end. It is one of the most dangerous and far-off corners of the world. Our instruments were broken, and we had been blown about 200 miles off course. Using the only navigational tool left, we discovered ourselves to be squarely in the middle of the most notorious pirate-infested area in the entire region, not to mention an area surrounded by reefs, islands, and dangerous shoal grounds. It was only by some miracle that we averted disaster. We survived it and unexpectedly found ourselves in the wilds of Borneo. Another surprise. This characterized and highlighted the unpredictability of the entire voyage and served as a message of just how lucky we'd been. Later research indicated that 1974 was a particularly active typhoon season in the Western Pacific. Although there were no super Category 5 typhoons of winds greater than 156 miles per hour, there were 16 storms that reached typhoon intensity with winds greater than 74 miles per hour. We entered the Sulu Sea on about November 5th, the same time as Typhoon Gloria, a Category 4 with winds up to 140 miles an hour, struck the northern Philippines. It appears that we had only been hit by the outer edges of the storm as its primary track and eye passed well to our north. However, with the counterclockwise cyclonic movement of such a storm, combined with the 75-mile-per-hour winds we experienced, coming mainly from the northeast, it's no wonder that we were blown off course and pushed to the southwest, which is indeed where we found ourselves. So that's how the name came into being, because when we were lost during this time,
I bet you do a lot of soul searching in a moment like that.
Well, I mean, you're your own person. You better figure it out, or you're done. If you don't figure it out, you're not going to the local store to get instructions.
You're going to the bottom of the ocean.
You're going to the bottom of the ocean. That's if you don't.
Davy Jones' locker.
Yeah, Davy Jones' locker. So So we were.
Rick, you seem like such a normal person. It's like hard to hang out with you and think, God, this guy was going through all those.
It's like a whole nother
trials
lifetime
and tribulations.
to me. It's like a whole nother lifetime. I don't know. It's hard to describe it when I'm trying to write this and trying to relive this adventure. It's a whole.
Well, it's made you who you are today. You can't undo it.
You know, and that's another thing. That's another part of this. I never grew up with aspirations of becoming a drug smuggler, for Christ's sakes.
You don't have kids.
You know, I was going to be a doctor.
But you do have a stepdaughter that you talked about. What does she think of all this?
Well,
because this is before her entrance really into your life.
Right. She's told me I adopted her as an adult. And she said, you know, Dad, one of these days I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to get a bunch of tattoos and piercings, and I'm going to go to jail just so you can see what it's like to have a delinquent for a child.
Did you say, oh, that's okay?
Yeah,
No,
I
thanks.
did. I said, you don't have to do that. I kind of know.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm glad the book it has a mostly happy ending. Some of the people don't have less than happy outcomes, but it's sort of like if you deal with stories like this, there are dark parts of it. I'm glad you made it out to tell the tales.
Well, of the four of us on the boat, I'm the only one left.
Wow.
Yeah, so that kind of really brings it home as to, you know, I wanted to get this story out before I died.
Right.
You know, at least I've got something. At least I've got a legacy of that.
Well, it's very well written, and it's even though it is a long book. If it was in a smaller format, like the typical paperback format, it would be like an 800-page book, probably.
It would.
It's a fatty.
We
It's a
calced it
tale.
out. We calced it out when we were going to print, and my editor told me this book it can't be the normal size. It's going to be 800 pages.
But what's nice about it, it's easy to read. I mean, the print is such that it's very easy to read, and I like that for myself. I can honestly say that.
Oh, there was one other part about Nepenthe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we've got to talk about the boat, Nepenthe.
Well, the name,
Yeah.
you know, we bought this boat, and its name was Nepenthe. And when we discovered what Nepenthe meant, it's a drug that was used back in the ancient Greek times, back to the Iliad, and there's mention of it in the Iliad and Helen of Troy.
Wow.
So I mean, this was
It may have been one of the the mysteries, the Elysian mysteries, because
one
they
of
did
those
do drugs.
coincidental things.
Wow. No, you know, I was sad about the boat, the racing boat that was that ended up being pretty much abused and destroyed. But that was a sad tale. What was her name?
Mamamuchi.
Mamamuchi.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful boat. It was a Camper Nicholson 55, and it had won races, and it was a gorgeous boat. And I bought it in Hong Kong, and we bought it to do that load, which it didn't get done for one reason or another. You can read about it in the story. But the boat did ultimately get used and basically destroyed. I mean, I saw it about 10 years later in San Francisco, and it was just a mess. And then I never saw it again. I read about it. I actually read the person who had the boat at that time forfeited it to the government, and I found the article in the Reno newspaper about that forfeiture.
Wow.
Yeah. So
It's crazy that you got to know the whole after story, that you actually are the fount, because you are the one that paid attention. You are the one that was there through so many of the stories of the story, and you survived to actually came across various people to tell you the after stories.
Yeah. I mean, some of the best people in the after story that I knew were government people.
How about what was the name of the prosecuting officer?
Well, there was Jim Conklin.
The DA.
The team of two Jims, Jim Conklin and Jim Nielsen. I interviewed them as part of the story.
I can't believe you just called this guy up after all these years, after you get out of jail, and I'm writing this book. What was his reaction?
Well, that was the most amazing thing, because as I was writing this book, I was feeling like there's too much of me in this book. I need to have I need to have a view from the other side to make it real. So I called. I searched online till I found the agent who had busted me and busted everybody. And I called him up. He was living in Las Vegas. He was retired from the DEA, and he was an investigator. And I called him up. I said, Jim, this is Little Rick. And he blew his mind. What are you doing? And I said, I've written this book, but I want to include you in it, and I want to develop a parallel story. I know all about the bust and everything, but I don't really know about you. And I want to figure out who you are, who you were, and develop a parallel story, and then how our paths crossed. And he was very receptive. He was very supportive of the project. He introduced me to the IRS agent who had chased all of us, and I interviewed him too. And it just made to close that chapter
as a book and as a chapter in your life.
Yeah, and he was, he was on the witness stand against me, and it was heavy.
You know what, though? I guess, like, the crazy thing is it's just people playing the role that is there at that moment.
Well, he wasn't out to... He didn't...
It wasn't personal.
Right. Well, it also, he wasn't out to save the world.
It almost seems like a lot of people they saw that you had some merit and wanted you. A lot of people wanted you to get out of this business and go straight, so to speak.
Well, Father Source, the chaplain who I worked for in prison, was a mentor to me. And he told me, he said, if you never get caught, you might not ever get caught. But once you get caught, you will get caught again if you're doing it. There's 100% chance. They're watching
I've never
you.
heard a story where people didn't get caught. I mean, usually at this level, most stories, some legal situation is happening. How strange that you were raised a young Jewish guy, and here you are, this Christian chaplain in jail ends up being
very funny because
your mentor.
Everybody in prison has to have a job. You have to have a job. So I had heard that there was an opening in the chaplain's office, and it was very difficult to get that job. So I went and talked to him. I came in and I said, Father, look at this place. It's a mess. It's a pigsty. And he said, pigsty? And that's what you want to work in a pigsty? And I said, well, I'm Jewish, and if it's a real pigsty, I probably can't work here because pigs and Jews doesn't work. But anyway, we got through all that, and he hired me, and I cleaned up his office. As a matter of fact, while I was there, this was in Tucson, I had requisitioned a brand new chapel from the Bureau of Prisons. It arrived after I got there, after I left.
Wow.
And, it was like $100,000 manufactured chapel that it's still there.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
That was 30 years ago.
I imagine those things, like, it almost seems corny, the chaplain but for some of those guys, that guy probably was a pretty big mentor for a lot of guys there.
He was very good, and he said, he told me, he said, I've never been in a place with so many innocent people. Yeah,
Father
he was a character.
Source.
He was a super, and after I got out, I maintained a friendship with him up until he passed away, and he was just a great guy. He was just a really neat, down to earth guy. I was his success story because everybody else went back. I never did.
You stayed on the straight and narrow.
Either went back or were dead. So I got the picture.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did.
Once I got the,
or you wouldn't be here.
Well, people will say, well, you didn't get enough time or this or that. I got enough time to get me to understand what was important in life.
Well, as you said, it's a tale of redemption and your own redemption, and especially through telling the tale so that others may laugh with the humor, learn the lessons of the pitfalls, and
it's a cautionary tale.
It is.
I don't want somebody to go out and use this as a how-to.
Well, you couldn't anyway because it's a different world. Again, cannabis is now legal. There's a whole different thing about it. But understand, back then people weren't not smoking. They wanted the cannabis since the 60s had become a real thing that people were tuning into and realizing that it was providing them relief from the world, which was a different world back then. It was a world of stern fathers and people telling people to get in line and do things a certain way. I mean, we would definitely not be the freewheeling people we are right now. If it wasn't for a lot of that movement happening, you know.
Well, one of the most interesting,
especially among artists, for goodness sake.
One of the most interesting things to me is how the whole medical side of it has developed. I mean, this takes it away from kind of the recreational part of it. And, you know, I've studied a lot about this. And
it's huge.
It's enormous. And I don't think they've even come to understand it completely now.
No.
And they're constantly...
You still can't do... Here's the crazy thing. Federally, research. You still cannot do research into cannabis medicine
in the US.
Unless the point of your research is to prove that cannabis doesn't work. Then they'll fund your study if you're trying to show that it's bad. But if you're trying to show any benefit to cannabis, you know, I'm actually made some cannabis salve myself just yesterday for topical use for pain use. It is huge. And so many in our community here in Vallejo, many people, especially seniors, are tossing out a lot of their prescription meds because they prefer to have a little puff or a little vape or a little bit of an edible in the evening.
Well, if you read all this stuff about the opioids and cannabis and relating to cannabis in that realm, it's phenomenal.
And demonized for so many years as the gateway drug, this terrible thing that's it kills brain cells. It gives you impotence.
Follow the money.
Yeah.
Follow the money when you want to go in that part of it, because there's a lot of pressure to keep it illegal because, you know, from whoever, whether it's pharmaceutical or politicians or whatever.
Yes. I mean, I think the pharmaceuticals are very frightened because they cannot patent cannabis. Although I'm sure they're trying to find out how to as we speak. Monsanto is probably working on their cannabis seeds that if they get into your cannabis garden, then they'll come take your crop and claim that you owe them a patent fee.
Or something, you know. I mean, Rick Simpson has the answer.
Yes.
It should all be available to everybody at no cost. I mean, it should at free. It should be. It's
well,
a plant.
And that's the beauty that really I know many people through the COVID crisis have been getting their gardens in order, and of course, for many that includes a few cannabis plants for their own medicine, and it kind of makes sense because the one plant, I mean, the Rastas call it the healing of the nation.
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to create your own medicine. I mean.
Yep, whatever it is, a tincture, whatever that may be. And as well as so many other herbs and things that are good out there growing in nature that should not be illegalized because they're plants. They tried to illegalize the castor plant at one point.
Oh, really?
Yes, because the castor plant is what you make. They actually can make ricin, which is a very potent poison. But you have to make ricin out of castor plants, you have to like distill and distill and distill. So you can't just eat a castor plant and die from ricin poisoning. But yeah, at one point they tried to make it illegal for people to have beautiful castor plants growing in their garden.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I have those too.
Aren't they great?
Yeah, they're really pretty.
Mm-hmm.
They're just beautiful. Well, I'm going over my little notes, and basically, we talked about the two gyms, and now I'm just wondering if you want to share a little bit with our listeners about what you're up to these days. I mean, obviously, right now you're sharing your book, and
yeah, well. After writing the book, we decided to go on the road, and that's what we're doing. We're full-time RVers right now.
This is the first stop on the first major radio stop, too, by the way. This is a premiere. This is special.
It is. I mean...
Definitely. An exclusive interview.
Yeah.
With Mr. Bibbero.
That's we're living life right now. I mean...
So instead of bricks of kilos and the stuff, you have an RV stuffed with books.
Right. And you go to places, where cannabis is illegal still in this country, and you must pay attention to what's going on because I've had enough trouble in my life. I don't need more. So it behooves you to understand the laws, in the various states, countries, whatever, so that you don't get in trouble. I mean, you can't just, even today, it's legal, but it isn't. So
Right.
you can't
light up everywhere.
Yeah, you can't just be cavalier about what you're doing. I mean, you got to think about it.
Especially, I know, out of Colorado, a lot of the states surrounding Colorado are not legal, and they just wait for folks to come
That's
out
correct.
with stuff from Colorado through their states.
Right, and
they're
they're arresting people all the time for that, and so you got to think about that. You have to think about what you're doing, and I don't need to take any more chances. I mean, I'm loving being a writer and promoting this book and talking about this book, which is another phenomena to me, because for all this time I had to be so quiet about everything, and I couldn't share the stories with anybody.
Well, as you say, enough time has gone by, enough people have passed on, enough laws have changed, and people's
Or statutes of limitations.
So the time is now to tell this wonderful tale.
Yeah. I mean, there aren't that many people left who can tell these tales, because they happened 40, 50 years ago. And, a lot of those people aren't around. I feel fortunate to still be here to be able to relay the story, because it's a good story, and it really wants to be a movie. I mean, it always,
it does.
Here was the thing.
Yes.
Some of the scenes are so visual.
When we were out there doing it, we always said to ourselves, boy, would this make a great movie. I mean, we always said it. It never left my mind. And when the whole story was over, I still reflected on how could this be made a movie? And because I never contemplated
complete
a book.
with sexy girls. It's got some. I want to just say there are juicy bits too. Rick didn't leave out all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to read the juicy bits.
Yes,
We're
the
saving-
partying,
we're
the
saving
fun,
that for
Yeah.
you.
the dinners, the travels, the art.
Yeah. So it's been a challenge getting it out there, and I'm pretty proud of it. I feel good about it. I feel like I've told the story, and that's pretty much it. I'm getting some very good feedback from it. I think we've always thought it should be a movie. We're trying to get it into that realm.
You did say that you're thinking about working on an oral audiobook.
An audiobook. That's the next thing I really want to do, is an audiobook. I've had a guy tell me, I can't read a book like this, but if you do an audiobook, I'll listen to it.
Absolutely, there are a lot of people out
And
there.
so-
It would make when I was shopping for another friend, I looked and I went, oh, it's not on Audible. So yeah, so it will be soon.
So for Don Henderson, it will be an audiobook, and you will be able to listen to it.
Awesome.
Just for you, Don.
Just for you, Don.
Well, all of us, Kate and I, definitely want to thank you for writing such a detailed story and of adventures. And
Well, I'm so happy to be
Yeah.
able to sit here with you and discuss some of it, and
yeah, and I had things going on in my life, and I couldn't put it down. It'd be okay. I can read for just a little bit, and then I'd find out I'm like, oh shoot, So, listeners, it's an easy read.
I mean,
don't be surprised, or the cover, the size of the book. It goes by so fast. It's really an exciting read. Definitely.
I've had people who don't read, who've never read a book like this, who've never read a book of this length, actually read it and get in trouble from their wives because they were supposed to put up the Christmas decorations, and they were huddled in a corner reading this book, getting screamed at. So people, I've got quite a few people who've never read a book like this who actually sat and read it and loved it.
Is there a website? I know you can buy the book on Amazon.com. Is there a 90 Degrees to Zamboanga?
It's 90 to Zambo.
90 to Zambo.com.
90 the number 90 TOZAMBO.com That's the website. That's where
What
you'll
a
get
great
it.
gift. Honestly, I think this will make for if you have anybody that has an interest in cannabis history, adventure or travel even, or the good old days of the 70s in the Bay Area that lived, because if you lived in those 70s and 80s in those times, you will recognize things in this book.
There's another
This is a
book.
Bay Area story.
There's another book that was written right about this time called Season of the Witch, which is a book about San Francisco history from the 50s to the 80s.
Oh, wow.
My story is kind of part of that story. It's just another part of that story.
A different angle.
A different angle. So
Wonderful.
that's another good book, and my story is right in the middle of that.
Well, Rick Bibbero, thank you for coming back to the Bay Area, to your home, to launch this book story with us here at Ozcat Radio.
Maybe you'll come back when you have the audiobook, and
Yeah,
we'll
I will.
do.
I will.
If you can't come back, we'll do a phoner and we can play some bits of it.
Sure.